Hello, listeners. This is Janine
and Kristen
from Henrico CASA. You are listening to our podcast, Vigilant Voices.
Living life every day.
Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining us today for another conversation around the well-being of children.
Because when we know more about the challenges facing children and families in our community, we can help ensure no child faces continued abuse, neglect, or trauma.
Yes. And during this season of gratitude, can we just say thank you?
Yeah.
We so appreciate you being with us, learning, growing, and making a difference in children's lives.
So grateful to be working together with everyone here, with all of you, to build a community that values children and really prioritizes their well-being.
Yeah, for sure. And in the spirit of gratitude, we were hoping to share some stories with you today. Stories of children we have been serving this year, their advocates, and how life is starting to look different now that CASA is involved.
And I've personally been looking forward to this recording session when we were thinking about this episode, because I find stories like this to be really encouraging. They have similarities to the hundreds of other cases in children we've helped and worked on this year. But the biggest commonality is that each of these stories involves a CASA advocate who is showing up for a child to make sure that they're not alone.
Yes. Because as Dr. Mate is quoted as saying, children do not get traumatized because they are hurt. They get traumatized because they are alone with that hurt. And so an important part of our work at CASA, which again is court-appointed special advocates, it's so important to make sure that children who've experienced abuse, neglect, or other forms of trauma are not alone.
Right. And you know, our advocates, which we're so proud of, they keep showing up. They show up again and again to be that consistent presence in these children's lives. And in many cases, no one else knows their situation and circumstances better.
That's so true.
I kind of always call us the historian of a children's story. And that helps us then speak up for their needs and make recommendations on their behalf within the court system and the community.
Yeah, our advocates for sure do such important work. Add them to the list of things we're grateful for this holiday season.
For sure, no question about that. They are amazing, caring, compassionate people who are they're stepping up to serve.
Right.
And I will unabashedly, as I do sometimes, put in a plug here. But if any listener is interested in volunteering as an advocate, please visit our website to learn a little bit more, but see the steps to get started. And I think we can certainly link all of those special links to our show notes, right?
Yeah, sure. We'll put the link out there.
Cool.
And okay, so like I mentioned, we're going to share 3 stories today.
And consider this a sneak peek in some ways, because these are stories that we are going to be releasing next month as part of our annual end of the year campaign.
That's right. We love communicating stories like these this time of year because they just show what we do and what a difference our advocates can make. And we're intentionally sharing stories that don't have endings yet, so you can kind of see the progression and how life starts to change throughout the whole process of CASA intervening in a child or family's life.
Right.
So first, we'd like to introduce you to baby Luke. Again, names and details are changed for privacy. Yes. We value their confidentiality.
Exactly. So we're keeping those names and identifying details private to protect them.
Yes. So baby Luke is a quiet little guy, quieter than you would expect for being a few months old. And that's because he has already learned that his cries go unanswered. When he's thirsty for a bottle, when his diaper is dirty, when he's cold, he just remains silent.
Yeah. It's really sad because clearly this little one was just very neglected.
Yeah.
But he was appointed a CASA advocate who would help him find his little voice.
Yeah, thankfully. So first and foremost, Luke's advocate started speaking up for his health and safety. And so she met with kinship caregivers who are now taking care of Luke and was working with them to connect them with resources they needed to be able to nurture him in a healthy way. The goal was to get him back on track with his developmental milestones.
Right. And this story, I think, really stood out to us because, the advocate knew that helping Luke, especially as such a young child, meant also speaking up for his parents' needs as well.
Yeah, that's so true because honestly, Luke's parents are just children themselves.
Yeah.
They were, already involved with the court system for their own truancy and some risky behaviors. Yeah. in addition to Luke's child neglect. And helping Luke means getting his parents the help and supervision they need, whether he goes back to them or not. Right. That's what makes a healthier family.
That's right. Because however, ultimately this case ends, with, like you said, Luke returning to the family of origin or needing to be cared by a relative or someone else for his own well-being, if we're able to help Luke's parents do better, then that's only going to help Luke as he grows and will, of course, want a connection with them.
Right. And so Luke's advocate is using her voice to make sure that Luke, who doesn't yet even have a voice, has everything he needs for his current health and safety, but also his future well-being.
I think that's a great example of the work that our advocates do, because helping children really does often mean helping the adults in their lives too.
Yeah, without a doubt. Okay, so that's sweet Luke. Next, we wanted to introduce you to Sydney. Sydney is a little bit older. She's in elementary school, and she is a star student. She loves school and all of the attention she receives there. It's her safe place.
Well, and oftentimes schools often are for children because it's a break maybe from whatever chaos they're experiencing at home, structure, stability, right?
Yeah. Right, so true. But unfortunately, school kind of lost its appeal after Sydney's mom, her verbal assaults kind of made their way to the schoolyard one day. And so, what had been just kept at home was now kind of public at school. And Sydney felt so just ashamed and embarrassed. She literally just went silent that day.
But this is, I think, about the time, if I recall this story, that Sydney's CASA advocate was appointed. And so, we knew that she wouldn't have to be silent for much longer.
Right. So Sydney's advocate is helping her transition to living in her new foster home. Okay. And this new home is safe and calm, but at the same time, it's unfamiliar to Sydney,
which
right?
Which is completely understandable because, as we've talked about, when a child goes into foster care, it may be necessary, but in essence, they are living with strangers.
Right. And that can reinforce feelings of loneliness or rejection. For Sydney, it's causing her to dwell on her mother's addiction and her father's absence. And so I'm so glad her advocate can offer emotional support every week when she visits. And during these visits, this advocate also verifies that Sydney's safety plan remains in place.
And I think that accountability is really important. And actually, like Luke, we're not really sure. The case is still continuing, so we don't quite know how the story is going to end.
Right.
But, if her mom participates in treatment and takes, the steps necessary to keep Sydney safe, that would be huge.
Wonderful.
But in the meantime, it sounds like she's fitting into a new school, which is good. And I'm thankful that she has an advocate who's making sure that she doesn't feel alone during this, frankly, scary process.
Yeah, so true. When we talk to people considering becoming an advocate, they often say things like, being an advocate sounds like it would be emotionally challenging, right? And we always remind them that these children are experiencing these dark things regardless.
Right.
So isn't it worth kind of stepping up to make sure they're at least not alone?
Yeah, and that reminds me exactly to the quote that you shared when we were first starting, because being alone with hurt is just so much worse.
It is. Okay, so now you've met Luke and Sydney, but there's one more story we wanted to share today, and that is the story of Hayden. And again, we're so glad she isn't alone. Hayden is entering her teenage years.
Fun years.
But unfortunately, she doesn't have the support, the guidance, the boundaries that teens typically need to stay on track.
Yeah. And in this situation, Hayden's case is usually referred to as a child who needs supervision. So it's a child in need of supervision, which is what we call CHINS. And so when a CHINS motion is filed, a judge has to decide if a child needs some type of court-ordered support to successfully navigate life, frankly, day to day. And so that was the point when Hayden's CASA advocate was also appointed to her case.
Great. And I'm so glad Hayden has an advocate because she needs a stable adult in her life to help her plan for her future, right? Her advocate is collaborating with social workers and other case professionals to create a safe home environment. The goal is to prevent Hayden from having to go into foster care.
Right. And part of the reason that this is the goal is that she has told her advocate very clearly that she would like to stay with her parents if they can receive the help that they need and get that mental health support.
Right, right. And this is a great example of an advocate listening and then making sure the other professionals kind of factor in what Hayden is wanting and needing.
Right.
In addition to helping connect Hayden's parents with resources, this advocate is also getting Hayden medical help for a few problems that kind of previously went unnoticed or weren't prioritized. Like she needed glasses, but her parents had never taken her to get them. And her school has been recommending grief counseling for a while, but her parents hadn't followed through on that.
Right. And I think in these situations, it really sounds like her parents were really sort of consumed with their own mental health problems.
Right.
And that may have taken precedence over Hayden's needs. So this is why I'm always very thankful that she now has someone who's really solely focused on her and her best interests, so that nothing she needs, whether it's glasses or grief counseling, is overlooked or even, frankly, delayed.
Right. Totally agree. And Hayden's advocate is making sure Hayden's voice is heard, even in the meetings and hearings where Hayden isn't present.
Right.
It's reassuring to know someone is looking out for her and speaking up for her.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, all of these stories have been, I think, great examples, but this really sums up what all of our advocates do. They're appointed to serve on the hundreds of nearly 400 cases that we serve every single year. And each of those cases in children, you know, has a story like these. And so each case is a child who has needs, a child's family who has needs, and so forth.
Yeah, and we at CASA amplify children's voices. Yeah. Our staff and volunteer advocates show up day in and day out for these children. But honestly, our voices aren't loud enough on their own.
Right. And so this is the season of gratitude and giving. And so this is where we ask our supporters to consider taking action on behalf of these children by contributing to our work.
Right, because by financially supporting Henrico CASA, you're giving children a clear voice. You're giving them a resounding future and the assurance that they are not alone.
Right. And by giving a gift, you are also increasing our capacity to continue offering that support, compassion, and frankly, hope for the nearly 400 vulnerable children that we expect to serve this coming year.
Yeah. And so our call to action today might be obvious at this point.
But hey, you know, Giving Tuesday is coming up on December 3rd.
It is. And we would ask you to make a donation to Henrico CASA. There's more information on ways to give on our website, which is henricocasa.org. You can look for our Giving Tuesday social media post, and then we'll also link to these things in our show notes.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to thank everyone in advance for any support that you can provide. We are a nonprofit organization that serves Henrico County's court system. And as we've shared, we are an agency that is comprised of amazing advocates who volunteer their time, but they're also everyday people in our community that are stepping up to support families in crisis. And so they are amazing. So with your help together, we can all continue fighting for the health and well-being of the children in our community, and stronger families and brighter childhoods leads to a healthier community overall.
Thank you for listening to Vigilant Voices, Henrico CASA's podcast. We have a vision for all children to live in safe, healthy homes. You can help us make that happen. Tell a friend about our podcast and find us on social media.
I believe in the better days.